AI chat interfaces might actually be hurting students' ability to learn effectively. And in this video, I'm going to show you how we can take the block of text that you get from chat and turn it into something much more helpful for learning, like this interface. Why? Because when a student comes onto ChatGPT and asks them to get help with their essay, ChatGPT eagerly throws a block of text right into their faces. And in the students' brains, what's happening is they're essentially building a fake interface of their own, trying to make sense of the different questions they got, the different bullet points that they're looking at. That block of text is like going to the Amazon checkout process, and instead of having clear steps for shipping, payments, and placing orders, it would be like ChatGPT throwing a block of text at you and asking you about your address, your payment details, and everything in one go. This analysis is going to be done with ChatGPT's newly released Study and Learn mode. That way, we're giving the designers at OpenAI the benefit of the doubt using the mode that they deem best for learning. Let's take a look at the original prompt. This is a student in Canada, where this is being recorded, who is trying to use AI to get assistance with writing an essay about the fur trade. So they ask, I want to learn about Montreal's role in the fur trade in shaping Canada's history for an essay. And with Study and Learn mode enabled, this is the answer that they get back. Without doing too much of an analysis, we can already feel that this is quite overwhelming. Where should I focus as a student? What should I look at? What question should I answer? Let's peel back the interface for a second and take a moment to actually understand what we're looking at here. In fact, there are 4 distinct blocks in this answer. The first is the AI is trying to do some requirements gathering, asking the student about what grade level they're in so that it can help them at the right level of depth. The second is providing additional context. It's giving them information about location, economic role, cultural role, and historical impact. The third is a structure recommendation for the essay itself. And then the fourth is a task confirmation. However, right away, we can see that there's a problem with this interface. The AI is requesting a user action at 2 different parts of the blocks of text, not making it clear which one takes priority. Not only that, but between the 2 actions, the student is being given additional information, and it's not clear exactly what they're supposed to do with that information. Putting on a user experience designer hat or even an instructional designer hat, we can see that these tasks actually have some level of dependence. You first have to learn about the student's level in order to provide them with context. The context then informs the structure, and only once we have a good structure should the AI ask whether or not it should continue with the task. Let's also call back the example of the Amazon checkout process and see that this actually lines up quite a bit like that. Technically, we are first asking them for requirements, just like you would ask someone about their shipping details first, then providing them with additional context for them to make a decision about the structure. And only once they've confirmed the structure that they like, do they go on to confirm the order. And this is a basic principle in any kind of user experience design, which is that you need to let the user make one decision at a time. In fact, there's something else that's really interesting about how we currently teach students to use AI, which is by giving them prompt tips and by telling them to pay attention, but not telling them exactly how to pay attention. There's actually a clue in each of the blocks that something is going wrong in terms of prioritization. And perhaps we should be enabling our students to pay attention to these things. And actually, if you're a student yourself, good job for being here, because you're going to be learning that right now. Let's start with the task confirmation. The AI actually says, want me to walk you through each of these 3 steps with guiding questions? But why should you walk me through these 3 steps? Looking back at those 3 steps, we have a few questions that we should be asking if we were going to be critical about it. For example, what is this based on? Where did the structure come from? And what alternatives can the student choose from? A really good interface would actually provide them with tools to understand how to either look for their own structures or even create their own. Now that we're in this block, what's the clue here that perhaps something went wrong in the chat? The AI itself says, let's not get ahead of ourselves after it provides the additional context. So then why did you provide it if you know that this is getting ahead of yourself? For a novice, for a student who is trying to learn, they may not realize that the AI is getting ahead of itself. And even though it's in there in the text, a novice or a student might not know to look for that. There's some questions we can ask about this as well. For example, did this snapshot impact the recommendation? What are the sources of the different bullet points of information? How did it decide on these items for the snapshot? Can the student adjust this snapshot to suit their needs and get different context? And lastly, what impacts will the snapshot have on the rest of the chat? Because in a generative AI chat, like in ChatGPT, there's something called a context window. The context window essentially means how much the chat keeps in its memory as you're talking to it. And many people don't realize that everything you put into a chat thread impacts the rest of that chat thread, and sometimes in mysterious ways that are hard to control. So the fact that this context exists right off the bat means that the student might have a really hard time weeding this context out if they stay in the same chat for long enough to complete their essay. And for the last clue that there's something wrong in the chat itself, where it says to get us started, even though in the requirements gathering it says before we dig in. So why did you tell the student before you dig in you need something if you're gonna get started anyway? Now, if you're an instructor or educator watching this, you're probably getting an inkling of something that's a little bit more nefarious than just an interface problem. You might have noticed that the additional context and structure recommendations are themselves the point of writing an essay. Yes, an essay is not just about filling in the blanks with some facts and stringing them together. In fact, in many cases, structuring an argument or explaining a concept is all about selecting context, and it's all about structuring it correctly. And when the AI off the bat gives both context and a structured recommendation, why should we believe that the students are likely to learn these concepts when they aren't being told explicitly how important these concepts are? And actually, when the AI presents a requirements gathering and a task confirmation sandwiched around those two bits of information, it's quite literally bypassing the point of writing an essay because it's including the actions around the most important part of the essay as if those are some throwaway recommendation. And let's not kid ourselves here. When you look at a block of text like this, if you have the actions at the start and the end, what do you think is actually going to happen when the students finish reading the block and there's a clear action at the bottom? They're just gonna ignore the first ask. It's quite unlikely that a student who is eager to get their essay done is going to go back to the first question and actually go, wait. Before you walk me through the steps, let me remind you that I'm in this grade and I want to write an argumentative essay. What they're most likely gonna do is they're just going to send the answer yes. And to prove this point, I actually tried doing that myself in ChatGPT. So I went and I just said yes. And without going like, wait a minute, what do you mean? What grade are you in? It just said, perfect. Let's go step by step and I'll give you some guiding questions. And here's the problem. Guiding questions could be useful, but the way the AI is doing it almost defeats the point of writing an essay yet again. Let's zoom in and see why this is. Right away, you can see that it's answering its own questions directly in the chat. When it's asking the students what geographical features made Montreal ideal as a trading hub, it's literally telling you a key point is the strategic location. Actually, if you pay close attention to the questions, you can realize that the student can achieve a lot of them by just Googling the facts and then filling in the facts to get the essay done. But in what universe are we pretending that an essay is simply filling in the facts to a structure that's pre-existed? Especially when in the interface itself, the student can highlight the question and then click on the convenient Ask GPT interface that appears right there. And all of these shortcuts and bypassing of learning moments are happening while we are in the study mode. This is particularly problematic because technically, if a student is incentivized enough to click on the study mode, we should reward them by giving them the best possible chance of learning effectively. The last thing I want to point out is that this answer that we got from ChatGPT was only the answer from the first chat I had with it. I tried at 3 different occasions to put in the exact same prompt, which is, I want to learn about Montreal's role in the fur trade and shaping Canada's history for an essay. And in the second chat, I got a pretty different answer, and I got a different answer yet again in the third chat. How different are these answers? Well, let's take a look. In the first one, I got a recommendation for a structure. In the second, I didn't get that, but I got a question asking me as a user to decide on the focus that I want, which is actually a better technique for learning. And then in the third one, I was given the chance to reflect on the history myself, which is an even better way to learn. What it did do well is in each version, it asked me for the context that I'm in as a student, but it was only in the first chat that it asked me what kind of essay I'm trying to write. These differences in response from the AI, despite getting the exact same prompt, violates another principle in user experience and user interface design, which is that a computer should have consistent reactions to the same user behavior. And in a learning context, this becomes particularly problematic because different students might put in the exact same prompt, even if you as an instructor crafted the perfect one, and get wildly different approaches to learning. So not only is this confusing to an individual user, but across a population of students, we might be seeing different outcomes despite each student behaving to the best of their abilities. And this gets even worse when you consider that OpenAI and ChatGPT store memory of the way you behave with the interface, and they respond to your preferences, even if over time you've developed preferences that may not be ideal for the learning outcome that you're hoping for. So the solution is not that you as an instructor should give people prompts, because there's no guarantee that the outcomes can be the same. The only consistent thing across these chats, though, is that it consistently asked for 2 user actions sandwiching the context in the middle, which is actually not so much a good consistency. So if anything, I was hoping that it wouldn't be consistent in this way. Now, let's go back to our 4 blocks. Let's borrow from instructional design principles and redefine these terms so that we can do what's called scaffolding of the learner's experience, so that we control the difficulty and the context around what they're trying to achieve in a given moment. Requirements gathering can be called asking for the learner's needs. So perhaps it's not just about asking for their level, but also figuring out what exactly they're trying to achieve. The next step would be to give them some knowledge. Then it would be to offer structure, and finally, it would be to invite action. But unlike ChatGPT, you shouldn't be doing these things in sequence without some gates first. What are those gates? When you first ask a learner for their needs, before you give them some knowledge, if after they've searched alone for knowledge and they are still stuck, then we can give them some knowledge. Second, if after writing alone they are still stuck, then we can offer structure. And finally, if after editing alone they are still stuck, then we can invite some more action from our part to help them actually work through the essay. So in fact, we should examine only asking the learner's needs to understand the initial part of this interface problem that ChatGPT presents to learners, even those with the best intentions. So would it be enough to take this block, the learner's need block, and just answer the student's original prompt with that? Probably not. Let's zoom in and figure out why. Let's break apart this paragraph to understand some of the flaws in it. When the AI says Montreal's story in the fur trade really is central to Canada's history, it's already biasing the student's perspective that Montreal is important. But maybe through an exploration of their own, the student would have not found that Montreal was as important. Moving on to the second sentence, this is actually quite an appropriate question. What grade or level are you writing this essay for? That's perfectly fine. What kind of essay is it? That's also an appropriate question that I myself as an instructor would do with a student. But the definitions here might not be clear to the student, nor would their use case be clear. So argumentative, explanatory, or comparative, if we don't know what grade the student is in, we might not be able to actually ask them to answer this question effectively. The last part of this is perfectly good. It's helpful to actually explain the intentions of what you're going to do with the information you're collecting from the user or the learner. So now let's go back to the first screen that we looked at, which is how the AI answered the student in the first place, and chop away everything but the learner's need. Let's do some tweaks to this in text form to see if we get to somewhere better. So let's remove the confirmation and just start, before we dig in, what grade or level are you in? And already this is an improvement, but this isn't enough. There's some small things we can do in the text to make it easier to parse and look at. For example, we can move the confirmation away so that the question is isolated, and we can even break apart the question into different bullet points so it's clear that there are 2 questions, so the student can actually reply by addressing the bullet points with 1, I'm in grade 11, and 2, I'm writing an argumentative essay, for example. But this isn't enough. At the end of the day, we're using a computer. And the reason why we have user interfaces in the first place is not because computers couldn't talk to us, it's because visualizing decisions is a way of visualizing mental models to avoid that overwhelming decision flowchart that I showed you at the beginning of this video. So instead of just having text like this, what if we expand it and we actually bring in some elements that the student can look at and click on to control the narrative? They could click on select your grade and choose the 11th grade, and then click on the argumentative essay if that's the one that suited them. Even better, we can remove the choice of essay and wait for them to select their grade first. An even greater enhancement would be that after the student goes and selects grade 11, instead of asking them what kind of essay they want to write, let's have the AI say, if the assignment allows you to choose, the 3 most popular styles are argumentative, explanatory, and comparative. And in those styles, we can actually lay out for them the different pros and cons of each style, when to use it, and what they should watch out for if they choose that style and how it might cost them in learning. The student can then scroll through the options, and in so doing, what they're actually developing for themselves is the ability to decide what they should use, which tool they should use for the goal they're trying to achieve, rather than it being a simple closed decision of tell me which essay and I'll tell you how to write the essay. Now, if you take a step back and consider this interface, you'll realize that all of this work was only expanding on asking the learner's need. Just that block alone can have so many approaches and can have so many learning moments that an interface designer, an instructional designer working together can create so many interesting opportunities to develop our students' abilities to think critically in ways so much more interesting than simply giving them a chat interface tutor to help them get unstuck when they're stuck or write an essay with a little bit of help here and there. Why aren't we striving to give students the actual tools they need to become better thinkers when time and time again we keep seeing people complain about the way education isn't preparing students for the future? Instead, all these tech companies are coming in and pretending that their AI tutors are some kind of solution to education, when in fact they're just enabling the faster completion of the same tired essays that we've seen over and over again. The answer on the left that we can see here from ChatGPT is nothing more than a simple outline generator for somebody to bypass the actual work of writing an essay well, of structuring an argument well, and becoming a better collaborator, a better contributor to society, and a better thinker for themselves overall. If you've made it all the way to the end of this video and you're wondering what you can do about this, I have 3 calls to action for you, depending on whether you're a student, an instructor or instructional designer, or an interface designer working in a place like this where you can make change. First, if you're a student, pay attention to the words in the AI that you see. Learn how to dissect text and understand whether or not the AI is working for you or against you. Is it simply pleasing you, or is it actually helping you get the work done? And this is something that even the head of AI at Microsoft talks about a lot, where he warns people to pay attention to the behavior of AI simply trying to satisfy their needs rather than actually address the most important things. Second, if you're an instructional designer or educator, think beyond giving prompts and tips to using AI. Think beyond fact-checking and the different problems of how do we make sure that students aren't reading fake news. Focus instead on their ability to dissect the text and come up with exercises that encourage those kinds of activities in the classroom directly. It's not enough to make it homework. It's not enough to throw tips and tricks at them. You cannot construct a prompt tips that's strong enough to override the fundamental issues of how the students interact with this artificial intelligence. Third, if you're a designer working at a place like this where you can actually make a change, I implore you to look up instructional design techniques, to look up visualization techniques, learning scaffolding, and think of the actual experience of developing stronger minds, not simply helping students get their homework done quicker and pretending that that is somehow improving learning. There are so many opportunities for us as designers to actually make this experience of studying with an AI something that actually changes education rather than continues to bypass the most important steps. Thank you so much for tuning into this. This is a topic I care about very deeply, and I want to continue making videos like this, perhaps dissecting the other 3 blocks that we saw in this video. What happens after we ask for the learner's needs? What opportunities are there to improve those interfaces for context, for structure, and for inviting action? If you care to learn about those, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel, where I will be posting more videos like this, or heading over to my website, charliegedian.com, where you can find my newsletter and sign up there to get more frequent updates. That's all for now, and I hope to see you in the next video.